Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. I am a clinical hypnotherapist, and today I am joined by Mark Stavish, who has written a very interesting book called The Path of Freemasonry. So I guess, Mark, first of all, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here.
And a good place to start is for you to perhaps tell us a little bit about what Freemasonry is.
Oh, boy. Well, it is a fraternity, and it is a little over 300 years old in terms of official history, meaning that is the formation of the United Grand Lodge of England, which is said to have occurred in 1717. But of course, it had to be older than that. Otherwise, there would have been no lodges to have a Grand Lodge with. And it is a worldwide fraternity. But what makes it quite interesting is it varies often considerably from location to location because it is very much a representation of its community. So when we say the Mason, and this is where non-Masons often make a mistake, they tend to think of it as a very uniform entity similar to a Catholic Church or various large religious movements, and it's not. It is a philosophical movement, it is a fraternal movement, and it is a charitable movement. Now, by charity, Masonry, at least in the United States, does between $1 to $2 million a day in charity. And of course, the famous Shriners, who are often the subject of a ridicule and mockery because they're kind of the party goer guys of the fraternity, raise and support, I believe it's 13 to 15 burn centers or hospitals, primarily for children, free of charge. So a lot of Masonic charity goes on very quietly behind the scenes for folks. Then, of course, there's a fraternal aspect, which everyone's aware of, and we have the pins and the key fobs and the, oh, geez, anymore it's easy to see a square and compass on just about everything that you can put it on these days. But it's about men getting together to help one another. We say the fraternity is, it is not a reform school. It makes good men better. So not anyone can join, although, pretty much anyone can. You have to ballot, and you have to petition and then be balloted upon. And there are reasons for exclusion, which I have not encountered in my 20 years, just to keep that clear. And then it's also philosophical. And this is where we see a lot of young men joining it today. They were influenced over the last 15 years by Dan Brown and his novelizations and stories of Masonry. And of course, they come to the fraternity seeking these great secrets. So there's a philosophical aspect as well. And of course, each lodge is unique. Some are going to focus more on fraternity. Some are going to focus more on charity. Some are going to focus, like the traditional observance lodges or the philosophical lodges, they're going to focus more on philosophy. So it is a big umbrella, is my point, and has many aspects for people to join. And you have to find your way in it. People ask about women in Masonry. Traditionally, women are not Masons for a variety of reasons, primarily ritualistic. However, there are exceptions to that, and we have Droit Humane and various Enco Masonry and a variety of Masonic bodies in which women are either the sole members or are there with men.
Okay, so let's think a little bit about the philosophical side, because I think this is the area that most interests many people, and in particular its ancient roots and sacred geometry. So tell us a little bit about what sacred geometry is and how we can actually see it around us.
Well, you see geometry around you in everything that you do. And in fact, within the Masonic symbolism, you often see the G in the square and compass. And if you ask Anglo-Saxon Masons, what that means, they often say God, but of course we point out that that doesn't work too well in French. So it has to mean something other than that. And sometimes an I is placed there as well, but usually it's a G. And those who've studied the question believe that it refers to geometry, okay? Because geometry is the basis of all that we have, which is the queen of the sciences. And with that, we say that, you know, the symbols, the symbols of the mason, the builder, are what allow for any structure to stand. Something has to be plumb and square, otherwise it falls over. So we have different, you know, the symbols of the builder show us how to do that. Then we take that and we refer that to ourselves philosophically. How is our life? Is our life, you know, is it something that will stand straight, or is it something that will fall over based on how we live our lives? So you see the transition from operative to philosophical using symbols as a way of asking questions about ourselves. Of course, the most famous symbol of building is the building of the Temple of Solomon. That forms the basis of almost all Masonic mythology. Well, actually, we could say it is the basis of all Masonic mythology. There are other Masonic mythos, but they come after the third degree. And for those who wonder about the degrees, anyone who is a Master Mason is what we call third degree. That's the Master Mason. Are there degrees after it? Yes, there are. But all of those require that one be a Master Mason, and therefore all are equal. Those are just considered explanatory degrees. They are not required. Okay. And they have their own stories, and wonderful stories. And with that, we see different structures. There's some that are around the different Egyptian construction. Those mostly are in Europe, not so much the United States, and continental Europe at that. We see a few around the Tower of Babel. Okay. So this notion of building and what kind of life are you building for yourself is very important. When it comes to geometry, we see that geometry, of course, is a representation of some conceptualization of divine laws in physical form, in graphic representation, yet still symbolic. I mean, we can see a square, and we can see what a square is, and we can turn it into a cube. And then within the Masonic structure or philosophical view, that cube becomes the rough ashlar, that becomes the smooth ashlar, that becomes the stone that is placed in the Temple of Solomon, or the Temple of God, the Supreme Being. What's interesting is that as the sides are smoothed away from that stone, or excuse me, the rough sides are smoothed away so that it is smooth, that the stone becomes useful anywhere. That is, you can take a smooth stone and put it anywhere in the temple, in the building. So you become more useful than you previously were, if you see the symbolism. So in that framework, we have many uses. I think there are other aspects of sacred geometry that we need to pay attention to, and it's probably easier in Europe because you still have many of the great cathedrals, and you have still many structures that were based around that. Of course, here in the United States, a great deal is made about the layout of Washington, D.C., in terms of its structure. You see the same about Paris as well to some degree, and some of the other great cities of Europe. But it's usually cathedrals or something of that nature. How do we apply that to our lives? Well, that comes into how do we apply the nature of order and harmony to our living situation. So within Chinese Taoism, you have a lot of talk about feng shui, you know, the air energy, air and water energies that move around us, the energies of life. We would refer to those as the mercury in alchemy. Can't move too fast, can't move too slow, can't have too much, can't have too little. We're always looking for baby bear's porridge, that which is just right. In India, they have an art of placement too, based upon the Greek notion of the elements, which fits in very well to our Western conceptualization because of the relationship. So we can look at our place where we live first and foremost and say, is it orderly and neat? Is it tidy or is it messy? Then what is the structure? Is it square? Is it round? Is it oblong? And what is the best use of that space? So we begin to look at space and structures openness and limitations as a means of formulating how we relate to that which is outside of us, and of course, ultimately to that which is inside of us. You can then even expand it outward to how you see structures in the art which you expose yourself to, the media you expose yourself to, or for those involved in esotericism of some kind or practical occultism, in the formation of sacred symbols, talismans, amulets, jewelry. Even ritual structure has an aspect of sacred geometry about it because it is movement. It is a three-dimensional movement, but along specific patterns.
So if I'm trying to, there's lots of different thoughts going through my head, but if I'm trying to, in, let's say, a modern flat in a tower block, to bring in, which could, to my mind, could not be further from the very notion of sacred geometry, which is about harmony and beauty, etc. There's something very stark and utilitarian about tower blocks as we have them in many instances. But let's say I'm stuck in one of these and I want to in some way improve it within my own space to bring in some of the principles of sacred geometry. What can I do?
Well, there are many things. One of them is to remember that the tower is the principal lookout. It is what allows you to see far. So instead of looking at your high rise, as we call them here, where your apartment is rather than a flat, instead of looking at that as a limitation, as a negative, look at it as a limitation, as a plus. It is where you are. You have a place to live. It's relatively warm and safe and dry and has all these good things. So always look at the positives first. Then look at the view. What does it allow you to view out upon? Okay. Just as if your tower were the tower of a castle or a keep, what do you see from it when you look out? Of course, you may have to play some games there if you have a balcony to decorate it more appealingly. The direction it faces is going to be important. It's nice if you have an east-facing one, get some sun in the morning, or a south-facing one, get some sun in the afternoon for plants. But if you say have a west-facing one, all of this will kind of decide a little bit what your philosophical view, both literally and figuratively, will be when you're out there, won't it? Because it's, do you see the sun rising or do you see it setting? Does it remind you of the beginning of life or does it remind you of the transientness of the end of it? From the interior, of course, you want to keep things relatively orderly. And of course, the area where you cook, which is the kitchen, what is that? That's the hearth. That's the proverbial fireplace. So those things associated with nutrition and the joy of eating and life and nurturing all take place there. Your dining area, regardless of how large or small it is, this is a communal area. This is a round table, that brings everyone or everything together. So you, as the king or queen of your domain, have your retinue or entourage that you have there as well. So it's a philosophical and imaginative view that you bring to it. Now, of course, for those who think we're kind of just making this stuff up, all they need to do is go look at Marsilio Ficino's 3 Books of Life, and they'll see that this is a well-known practice from the Renaissance and, of course, earlier.
But I think what I like about it, and it's why I asked you the question, is that it's about empowering the individual so that whatever the circumstance you are in, you are able to find beauty and bring it into your life. And I think that as a therapist, this is a hugely important part of my work with people, is about empowering them and helping them to see. Because once you can see the positives, and sometimes in the most dire of circumstances, once you can see the positives, you begin to find your way out. And so this is a very important thing. And you were being very visual in and in the use of the imagination, which of course as a hypnotherapist is what I'm all about, use the imagination, because that's going to be, but use it positively. We're very good at using our imaginations negatively, projecting forward and imagining the worst, whereas we need to use our imagination to envisage something. And I know that I'm using very visual language and not everyone is visual, but it's about imagining something, whatever means you're capable of doing that with, whether it's just by visualizing or imagining by using memory and bringing memories that you can elaborate on to see what it could be like, projecting the past into the future. So it doesn't matter how you go about it, but it's really very empowering. And I think that is one of the things that I liked reading your book about. One of the fundamental principles of Masonry being about the individual, the personal relationship with the divine as well.
Well, you have to, with the exception of the French Grand Orient, you must profess belief in a supreme being to be a Freemason. And at no time are you ever asked what that means. You just have to profess it. So I don't know if you want to call it the joke or not, but the joke is kind of the only atheists in Freemasonry are in France. And of course, that's just the Grand Orient. There's other French Grand Lodges. So ultimately, even that is a way, even if one is an atheist, so to speak, that's still a negation of a sense of deity, when it's still focused on deity, even if in a negative way, and at least in that respect, rather than a kind of a pure metaphysical atheism of say, Vajrayana Buddhism or something like that, or Taoism. I think that we have to always remember that the only thing we have control of is our own mind. And the power of fantasy is that which links all aspects of our mind together, as well as our experiences in the world, that is physical domain, with our past, and with what we can consider as psycho or spiritual domains. And it is all through the power of imagination. And when we say images, of course, we are referring to images, because 50% of our nerve energy, or 25% goes to visual perception as a survival mechanism. But of course, all of our sensory involvement takes place as well. When you're setting up your place, there's also, how does it smell? You want a house, an apartment that smells nice. That's why we like good cooking. That's why we like nice perfume. That's why we like incense. Then, of course, there's the sound. How do things sound? And it doesn't just mean that squeaky floorboard that annoys you, or it's always funny, isn't it, when you get a pair of shoes and they squeak, how annoying it is. Or I say, why does it squeak here but not there? What's going on? How am I walking? You're trying to figure it out. But then that goes into the music you listen to. Do you have at least decent music and good speakers or something that you surround yourself with? So we start primarily with the notion of sight, and then sound, but smell, because those are the easiest for us. But it also is texture. What are the qualities of the textures that we expose ourselves to? There's a tremendous difference between reading a book and reading a PDF. Not just in terms of the mental framework that takes place. Anyone who, you don't need a study to know that it's very difficult to learn on screen. It's very difficult to learn anything. It's just not the same experience, because it doesn't engage all of your senses. As a hypnotherapist, when you're taking someone through hypnotic induction, of course, we start with a sense, that is one of the 5 senses, with physical senses, but then we quickly engage the others and layer them on top. And this is what happens as those layers take place. Then the induction takes place. It's easier for the person to relax, to build the imagery naturally, to not even build it off and just let it arise, because they're relaxed. It arises within their own mind. And we want to do the same thing in our environment. We want something that is relaxing for us and truly relaxing. So what works for you may not necessarily work for another, but there are some general rules of order and harmony that sacred geometry tend to teach us. And that's what we have to look at. And of course, it goes a lot to your characteristics. Sometimes people can overdo a strength. Try to find balance. Like, remember, the bedroom is for sleeping and sex. It's not for eating, and it's not for watching TV, and it really shouldn't be for reading books either. Your dining room is for eating and conversation. Your living room, of course, is for entertaining. So try to create these structures in a way that is most harmonious with their natural affinity. And that will then also involve other symbolic aspects, such as planetary aspects, where you communicate is very mercurial, where you sleep is lunar, but also if you want a romantic aspect, you need Venusian. Where you cook can be both Venusian, Jupiterian, and very lunar. All of these aspects. Certainly when you go to the gym, or if you have a place where you work out in your house or apartment, that's very martial. Okay. And notice the gyms that aren't martial have a high membership and low attendance because the energies don't mix. The attraction is initially there for membership, but the energy isn't there for action. So this is what we're talking about, is creating the context. The physical context is what sacred geometry is all about, for specific action and specific outcomes.
I like that. Being also an astrologer myself, I think what we're talking about is both drawing in and embodying certain energies which are going to be helpful in our day-to-day living, and bringing that into our living space. And I think, again, this is a tremendously both liberating and empowering way to live, because what you're doing is you're creating a sense of harmony between yourself, your environment, which then helps you to feel more harmony in your relations with others. And the whole thing just kind of has a very positive ripple effect all around. But it can just begin with your room. And if that's all you've got, that's all you've just got a room, that's your space, then that's what you begin with. And this is it creates flow in life, I think, is what as well is what you're saying.
Yes, and look, it all begins with making your bed. I mean, a lot of people have these reactions to Jordan Peterson, but
Yeah, I
there
was
isn't
just
any
thinking about Jordan Peterson.
there isn't anything he has said that I haven't heard a Tibetan Lama say, or a good teacher. Make your bed, take control of your life, and stop being a whiner.
Yes.
And this is a hard lesson. And that means, sacred geometry involves effort. It involves really some serious thinking about, it's not just a matter of like feng shui where, I'm going to put this vase over here and think that's going to work. I mean, no, that's not really it. It's a conceptualization. It's a total shifting now in terms of your cosmology. How do you view yourself in relationship to this space? And then that's a reflection, a microcosm of how you view yourself in relationship to the cosmos. This is your little kingdom. We say here, every man has his castle. Every house is its castle. We even refer to in the United States law, the castle defense, or the castle doctrine. That, if you do not have to retreat from your home. There is a line which is not crossed. So this notion of, are we active forces in our own lives? Are we the kings and queens of our life? Or are we obedient serfs to someone or something else? And that really is dependent upon how much self-confidence you have, which is a kind of a say of saying how much respect do you have for yourself and your capacities as they are, and your potential to expand on them. And that means self-honesty. What am I capable of right now that I'm good at? And then goals. What do I want to achieve, and what do I have to do to get there? A tremendous amount of self-honesty is involved in this. So when we talk about sacred geometry, that is setting the space for the activities to take place. It's going to be tremendous benefit, but it's not going to solve the problem if you don't, one, either maintain it, or you don't undertake those activities in a progressive and realistic manner.
I think it's ultimately, it also comes down to self responsibility and self-discipline. And those are not words that are very popular, responsibility and self-discipline. But if we do take responsibility for ourselves and our lives, then we actually want to have the discipline to create what's needed to support the progress that we seek. And it's about what's inside as well as outside. So you've been talking about that very much. We were talking about creating the environment, but then there's something inside as well. But somehow, psychologically, the two go together. And there's been so much that, so many studies that have shown that just that action of creating a positive environment has a positive effect on the individual psychology. It makes it easier for you to want to have that self-discipline, and when you have a sense of order, but more than that, when you have a sense of beauty. And I think that also when you are making the effort to create a beautiful environment, you're also doing something else. You're nurturing something too. And then that has an effect of it being like nurturing yourself. So there are many things that reflect each other here.
Action is critical. We live in the world of action. We live in duality. And that means there is cause and effect. There is action and result. And to choose not to act is still a choice. It's still an action. And you get more of what you already have, which is usually the same or nothing or less even. So when you begin to act, what often inhibits people from action is the fact that it's work. It takes effort. And you may have to sit down and go through every piece of paper and see what's of value and what has to get thrown out and what has to be kept. You may have to make decisions about getting rid of things that are no longer helpful to you, but you have a certain degree of attachment to, for whatever reasons. And you have to undertake effort. And this has to do with the fundamental existential crisis. And in life, there are four basic existential crises we must face. And Masonry, helps embody these in various ways, symbolically, as do many other organizations and groups. And one is that we are alone. What does it mean to be alone? And with that, how do you bring meaning to your life? Because your life has no inherent meaning. That's what scares people. In my book, Egregores, the occult entities that watch over human destiny, we talked a lot about the nature of how one's goodwill is what is abused. And I've seen that now on some YouTube videos as well. They're talking about how your idealism and goodwill is used against you. I wrote about that, whatever the book was, 4 years ago or 5 years ago. And it's pretty much common sense that, if I don't have meaning in my life, I'll gravitate to something that will offer it. In your average urban area, a ghetto, that's going to be a street gang. That's going to be maybe organized crime. For other people, it may be religion, or it's going to be political movements, because they offer a whole complete philosophical structure. They offer a complete cosmology. This is the universe, and this is your place in it, and this is your relationship. It's a complete package. It happens in other ways too, to a lesser degree, but you see it even in some degree places of employment, uh, particularly anything that has a movement associated with it. Uh, Education and social services are the worst because they've been the most highly politicized because they're no longer effective. And because they're not effective, they use external force or politics to get their way. And this is how that's pushed upon it. And when we say effective, we mean at what? The mass. Any change, and this is again the existential crisis. And as you know, as a therapist, all change comes from within. The individual must motivate themselves to change. Once that happens, yeah, it's hard, but it's a lot easier than it was before. And then when you associate with a group of people who are doing the same, which is, as you know, why group therapy can be so useful, is when you get a good group dynamic, everyone is helping one another, even if indirectly. Because we become, this is a fraternal aspect of Masonry or any group, we become like the 5 people we spend the most time with. So this is how organizing one's environment begins to have ripple effects. As we're getting rid of stuff, now we're forced to think about, well, why do I hold on to this, or why do I do this? So, do I really want to be with these people? Are these really helpful? So the people will avoid this in order to avoid the whole thing coming apart, because now they have to piece it back together. But the beauty is you get to piece it back together in a way that is now healthy and beneficial to you. And you get the burden of being responsible for your own life, and you get the joy of being responsible for your own life and making it any way you want. And then we go into right and wrong, using the opportunity. Well, is there a right way or a wrong way? So you see, all these things have their own internal ripple effect. But if someone is patient and relaxed and a bit joyful and not exactly carefree, but we'll say just playful about the situation, they'll begin to move forward as they organize their life and have more fun about it. It always is a matter of perspective. People lose perspective. I mean, when you walk out, what city are you in?
London.
So when you walk outside now and you stand in your flat and you look up at the sky, what do you see?
Well, many people did see very little sky, many people.
But you don't see German Heinkel bombers overhead.
No.
You don't hear incoming V-1 rockets. And that's forgotten. That puts it in a whole new perspective. So what happens is people become very obsessed with themselves and their problems, as you know, and they identify with the problem. What we try to do is help people in therapy identify with the potential. That's why we say Masonry makes good men better. And really, that's true with therapy as well. Therapists only make, and when we say good, it's not so much in a moralizing sense. I don't mean that in good or evil, but people who are actualizing some of their potential. And in therapy, that's all you can do. If someone who is actualizing some of their potentials, we can help them actualize more of it. That's it. And sacred geometry is one of the tools you can do in organizing things and using as a method of reflection on how do you organize and actualize your potential? What are your qualities and how do I bring them about?
So this is ultimately why I was very interested in your book, is because we were talking about principles which I feel to be very valuable in terms of mental health and spiritual well-being, and which helps ultimately make the world a better place. Happy people make for a happy community makes for a happy society. So this is why it's important. And I would recommend that if you want to learn more about Freemasonry, then this is a great place to start. And the book is The Path of Freemasonry. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us and, well, telling us more about this for some rather mysterious fraternity.
Well, thank you very much. It was great to be here. I'm glad we're able to talk about such a unique and important aspect of Masonry, and also one that is really very easily applied by what we call, a non-Mason, someone who is just interested in the philosophy. So those who read the book don't feel that it's about the view, it's about the philosophical view of that
Exactly.
late Renaissance period, and how it's applicable today.
Exactly. And so it's something that's for everyone. And I will be putting a link to the book on in the description box. If people wanted to learn more about your work, how could they do that, Mark?
Well, they can just look at Google the Institute for Hermetic Studies, and we also have a Teachable platform. So at teachable.com, you can just log in and search for Institute for Hermetic Studies, and we'll show up, and our courses will. And of course, if you Google me, I'll show up, and there'll be numerous videos and articles and essays and ways of connecting with me there if you so desire.
Well, I'll certainly put a link for the Institute for Hermetic Studies in
Thank
the
you.
description box as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Do remember that if you have comments or questions, I always read and I always reply. And next time, we are going to be looking at crystals. Until then, goodbye.